Welcome to a new video for Luck Poker. Today I would like to show you how a mid-stakes player, that would be me, adjusts his gameplay when playing lower stakes. Okay, so these hands that you see right now were played in a relatively short amount of time. They were played in between the end of 2020 and 2021. And they are mainly from a bankroll challenge I made on Twitch last year. And I hope my conclusions may be helpful for you. So for you to know, all these hands were played on pokestars.com at the Zoom tables. My general approach is really exploitative, meaning that if I have no particular way to exploit my opponent, I am trying to play something similar to GTO, but if I think he has some leaks, I am going on full exploit mode. What I want to say is that the way I plan a hand normally is totally focused on my opponent. And this means that the stats I keep at the various stakes are pretty much influenced by my average opponent. So if we take my NL10 sample, this is how I would play versus the average NL10 player. If I play NL25, this is gonna be what I play versus the average NL25 player, and so on. But of course, since I'm playing exploitatively, I may play very differently versus specific opponents. The first thing you may notice is that I was playing a bit tighter at NL10, especially concerning my VPP, and I think that was simply because at NL10 I was trying to defend the big blind a bit more tight, since there is high rake. I think I should have done it also at NL25, even if it doesn't look like I did here. and if you see the rake big blind per 100, you can see it's decreasing when you move up in stakes. You can see that at NL10 is a bit lower than at NL25, but it's not because of the stake, it's simply lower because I play tighter simply. But yeah, look at this number. If you ever ask yourself how much rake is influencing your big blinds per 100 at the various stakes, well, here's the answer. You can see NL10, 25, 50, 100, and 200. So you can see that, it has kind of an impact, but your winner rate is typically going to decrease when you move up in stakes, even if you pay less rake, simply because, of course, your competition is much, much stronger. A thing which was surprising me when I was comparing the stats is my 3-betting range, which, as you see, is increasing typically with the stakes. And I don't think that's good. I think it should be the opposite, actually, because, at an L200, your average opponent is going to play pretty good versus 3-bet. And I don't think you should 3-bet on average much more than what is optimal. While at an L10, for example, I think your average opponent is going to fold too much, not 4-bet enough. He is going to play also poorly post-flop, which should lead to a higher 3-bet frequency. And to be honest, I don't know why I didn't do that. It may be, but I'm not sure, that the number is lower because there were more opens and calls, so of course I'm squeezing less than 3-betting, but I don't think that influences that this much. So that's something weird, which I don't think you should do. I think you should 3-bet more at lower stakes than at higher stakes in general. Something else interesting to notice is the fold to 3-bet, which is decreasing when I move up in stakes, and this one is fine to me, for two reasons. First of all, at lower stakes you pay more rake, so it's correct, technically speaking, to fold a bit more to 3-bets. And also, I think you should consider that an L10, the average player is 3-betting less than an L200. So theoretically speaking, it's fine to fold a bit more and maybe to 4-bet a bit less and call a bit less. So this is something which I think should happen. So if you play lower stakes, I think it's fine for you to fold a bit more, even if you have an edge on your opponents. Another thing that you may notice on the stakes, of course, is the $1 wins whole flop, which is decreasing when you move up in stakes. This means how frequently, when I see a flop, I also win a hand. And there are no surprises here, I think. Of course, the better my opponents are, the tougher it's going to be for me to win a pot. nothing to say here. I think it's pretty obvious and that's it. And something which may be interesting also is the aggression percentage, that as you see, my average aggression percentage decreased while moving up in stakes. And also here I think is fine, simply because, you know, when you play higher stakes, you want to be more balanced. And if you want to be more balanced, this means checking a bit more. And of course, when you start checking, your aggression decreases. If you play versus opponents who do not require you to be balanced, you are typically going to play more aggressively. You're not going to worry about checking to balance your checking range with some decent and strong hands. You're just going to bet them typically for value. It's pretty straightforward. And of course that happens more at an L10 than it happens at an L200. And as you see, it's really decreasing every stakes I play. Again, simply because when I was moving up in stakes, I was also encountering more players who required me to be balanced. Also, the flop c-bet success I think is something interesting. As you see, typically it looks like the c-bet success is decreasing when we move up in stakes. It was surprisingly high at an L100, but I don't know why is that, but in general the trend was decreasing. And this is something which I think is a huge misconception. Very frequently you hear, I cannot bluff at the micro stakes, people never fold. But you know, at least on the flop, it's quite the opposite. You know, the average bet player is not defending enough on the flop. They're not defending enough double vectors and ace highs on dry board, for example. And this of course leads to a much higher c-bet success. So in general, you should c-bet more frequently at lower stakes than you should c-bet at higher stakes. And also this is connected, of course, to how aggressive you are. If your c-bets are so successful, you're going to c-bet more and your aggression is going to rise. If your c-bet success is not that high, you should, of course, decrease your c-bet frequency and your aggression is going to go down a bit. It's also interesting to compare it to the turn and river. To be honest, I wouldn't consider the river because even on huge samples, these tend to be a bit variance influenced, and here it looks a bit random, to be honest. So I don't think the river c-bet success is something we should see, but it's interesting to see the turn c-bet success, which is exactly the opposite as the flop c-bet success. It's higher at higher stakes and lower at lower stakes. This is of course connected partially to the flop c-bet success, because if your opponent folds a lot on the flop, of course he's going to fold a bit less on the turn, and vice versa. But in general, also if you want to take a brief look at the river, c-bet success is in general pretty high. It's much higher than it is in all the previous streets, at any stake. And I think that may be an interesting information from some of you. You know, c-betting on the river seems very profitable at all stakes, and I think a good exploitation at any stake is to c-bet to triple barrel a bit more than is theoretically optimal, but be careful on the flop. On the flop you should be more careful to good players because they're going to punish you if you exaggerate. To recap, so here are my tips if you're playing lower stakes on the main adjustment you should typically end up doing in the field. Keep in mind you should probably fold a bit more to 3-bet. Keep in mind that you are allowed to c-bet more frequently at lower stakes than you are at higher stakes because simply you're not going to be punished enough. And also mind the rake. You know, at an L10 the rake is considerably higher than at an L200, so you should probably defend a bit less, especially when you are calling pre-flop, like calling 3-bets as we said, but also calling from the blind. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for watching.